This Restorative Justice Life is a production of Amplify RJ. Follow us on all social media platforms at Amplify RJ, sign up for our email list, and check out our website at amplifyrj.com to stay up to date on everything we have going on. Make sure you're subscribed to this feed on whatever platform you're listening on right now so you don't miss an episode. And finally, we'd love it if you left us a rating and review. It really helps us literally amplify this work. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life, the podcast that explores how the philosophy, practices, and values of restorative justice apply to our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. On this podcast, I talk with RJ practitioners, circle keepers, and others doing this work about how this way of being has impacted their lives. Today's guest is none other than Amplify RJ's own Omi Castro. I met Omi doing restorative justice work in Chicago and was quickly able to tell how deeply they embodied the values of this work in their relationships in both their personal and professional lives. When I started Amplify RJ, they were one of the first people I called. And if you've been through an Amplify RJ training or been a part of any of our community gatherings, you've either directly or indirectly felt their impact. I'm super excited for all the things we're building together with Amplify RJ and can't wait to have you be a part of them. A quick note, this episode was recorded on the morning of November 4, 2020, when we didn't know the results of the election. At the time I'm recording this intro, we still don't know. Either way the election goes, it won't really affect the work of Amplify RJ. If Biden wins, great. There's still a lot of work to do to build a more just and equitable world for everyone. And if we go deeper into the hell we've been living in for the last 4 years, well, the work is that much more important. You can join in on the work by checking out our latest offerings, including our self-paced Intro to RJ online course and new cohorts of our Foundations of Restorative Justice hybrid online course where we meet in person for 8 hours over time, and there's some additional work to keep you going between sessions. Those offerings will always be a part of what we offer, but we have special offerings coming up this month from former podcast guests Griffin Castillo and Helen Thomas. On Thursday, November 4, Griffin will be leading a workshop on youth empowerment and restorative justice, and on November 14, Helen will be leading a workshop on decolonizing Thanksgiving in the classroom. That's all for the intro and announcements. Let's get into our conversation with Omi. Welcome, Omi. Who are you?
I am Sasha Naomi Guzman de Castro, also known as Omi.
Who are you?
I am someone who has been reckoning with this 2020 year and trying to keep my spirits up as everybody else is.
Who are you?
I am somebody who feels very deeply and, empathetically.
Who are you?
I am a very queer, loving, polyamorous, and just all around unique kind of person.
Who are you?
I am somebody who loves to give very deep, long hugs and talk about really deep philosophical things, ideals, and try to smile throughout all the things.
Who are you?
I am somebody who's learning a lot about ancestry and connection to ancestry, intergenerational trauma, and intergenerational healing.
And finally, who are you?
I am somebody who just wants to help people end their own suffering.
For everyone listening, we are recording this on the morning of Wednesday, November 4. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the air. So with the fullness of this question, Omi, how are you?
Considering the circumstances today, I woke up feeling more confident in the people that are around me, more confident in what I want to bring, but also in the trenches of like, what the is going to happen? How are we going to surmount this moment, and what's going to be needed with everything that's happening and not happening? So I am doing well, happy to be here, happy to be alive, and also at the cusp of just finishing this huge program, this like not accelerated, but this sprint kind of program, Alt MBA. And so just like after being in a month of October completely overwhelmed, it's nice to just like have some rest and respite.
Yeah, so let's take a couple of those things at a time. One, you said like you're more confident in the people around you. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think that's a loaded question. There's been a lot of things that have happened this year in terms of relationships that I have with other people. And so one main thing that I've been thinking a lot about is like really how to have pride and confidence in the relationships that are around you. Particularly the ones that make you feel whole and seen completely. And so it's a good place to be in when you know that you're going to be protected by the people you love and care about and cared for, and that people are going to have your back. It's what I seek to have and create in community with other people. And so taking my pride back is one way I'll say that, particularly in terms of my relationship with Bryce and my relationship with you, David, as colleagues and humans who like really want to do good in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I don't think I'm going to push on all of that for the purposes of now. You also shared that you are coming out of an intensive program. What is that?
The program is, if anybody's heard of Seth Godin, he has this program called Alt MBA. And it's really like a journey that they take you on from like very beginning. It's like, how do we think about business and who is trying to make change in the world? And this program is like 3 days a week. One day is 8 hours you're with the learning group, and then 3 hours on 2 other days. And you're applying all of these concepts that are kind of about business, but also really thinking about other people's worldviews and how to have empathy with other people. So it's this enmeshment of like, how do you have relationships in the business sector while also like having that important piece of business happening, or like sustaining that piece of your business and making decisions and understanding that we all have emotions, and it makes us really irrational, that there's nobody really who's rational in the world. We're all just running through the world based on our own worldviews and experiences, and that we can still come together and bring those ideas from each one of our different backgrounds to propel business forward.
Yeah. What does that taught you about the way that you want to move in this work?
In this work, wow. It gave me a lot of different perspectives, I think I could say. There's, the perspective that I really grappled with throughout the whole program, which is like, how do I continue to do this work in a way that's not like exploiting other people, or that's really having a restorative process with the people that we're engaging with at every moment whenever there's like conflict that comes up, because realizing that if we're all irrational human beings, then we're all thinking about morality in a particular way. And if we're always thinking about right and wrong in terms of our own worldviews, then how does that impact the way that we engage with people around us? So that's one piece. And like, how does that function in capitalism and thinking about right and wrong? And then there's like another piece of, oh my gosh, you could bring all of these people together, and maybe not every single one of them is going to have the skills to empathize, or the skills to put themselves in other people's shoes, but they're also still learning from other people who do have those skills, or who are willing to leap into those skills. And it was just really amazing to see people working together and asking really deep questions and reflecting back, because that was really the premise or the guidelines that they set at the beginning of Alt MBA. I was like, wow, this is so RJ, to do this program in this way.
Yeah, this is the first time, in that response was the first time you mentioned the word restorative. You talked a lot about relationships. You've talked a lot about, the bonds between people, empathy, and all those things that we think about being restorative. But this is a podcast called This Restorative Justice Life. And one of the things that I ask people here is, you've probably been doing this work before you knew the word restorative justice. So in your own words, how did this get started for you?
Oh my goodness. That's so hard to say because I grew up in a Buddhist community, and I was born into it. And so it's almost like from the time I was a baby, I was sitting in circle with people, not really obviously adding anything to it, but sitting and soaking up people's stories, experiences, what they're wanting to achieve, talking about dignity and respect for human life, the sanctity of life and the environment. So I had a lot of these things around me from a very, very young age, but I didn't call it restorative justice, right? I called it Buddhism. So that's where it really all started for me, even though... So I was like learning these skills, gaining this training as a young person throughout my whole life. I never really left the Buddhist community, just sort of like had pockets of when I was super involved and when I wasn't. But when I really, really started to understand how important dialogue is, how important this intersection of justice, right? That this was going to be something important was I was 14 years old and my dad was murdered. And years go by because you have a case that's open about what's happening, or people are doing the detective work, and they ended up saying that my dad was the aggressor in the situation, even though he was the one who lost his life and had many, many more intrusions on his body, and so there was this feeling of injustice of there has to be something more. And I thought about that person's life for so many times. His name was Carlos, and it was just these moments where I would be I just want to talk to him. What was going through his mind? What did he why would he do something? What was he suffering with to be in that? I know what my dad was suffering with, right? And there was a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that, but really understanding from my Buddhist practice that when we have so much suffering deep in our lives, how difficult it is to have that communication, to be on a relationship level, to talk out in differences, and was just always really grappling with that. It's from the time I was 14 and up till now, right? How do we become conscious of our own suffering to see the way that it impacts the relationships that we have? That's how I first came into restorative justice, is just in that thought process, and really trying to empathize with somebody that normally most people would be nah, hell no. And so, yeah, it was a long-winded answer, but.
Yeah, no, there's a lot in there, and I think, was it just you feeling that way, or you grew up with your community? Was this something that your mom, your brother, your family, your community were embracing alongside of you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my whole family practices Buddhism, but there was a lot of suffering, right? And so for a period of time, we couldn't even be together because we were just always fighting. This is, and being a teenager, I never wanted to be home. My brothers were already out of the house because they're significantly older than me. And there was my mom, who was with my dad for 25 years, who was an alcoholic and often also abused drugs, was doing her own grieving and her own healing. And so how could we really pay attention to each other while also holding our own grief? And it was at that point where my mom realized that if I don't change something, my children are going to suffer for a very long time. And I admire my mom so much for that, for taking that step. And then my brother, my oldest brother, was also in college at the time, studying psychology. And he sought resources for us, therapy, free therapy resources, and really started to incorporate with us, had the courage to bring us together as a family in circle, to really, it was maybe 3 or 4 years after my dad's passing. But I remember one specific time we were sitting in circle together in our living room, and my brother Joseph just asked, if there was anything that you could say to him, these years have passed, what would you say? And we each went around and talked about what are the things that we would say to Joseph Castro Sr.
Do you remember what you would have said?
Yeah, I remember saying, I'm angry. I'm angry at you for not having the courage to face your own suffering. And I'm sad that because of that, it led you into the circumstances that you were in. I'm angry that you you were so afraid of yourself that you couldn't bring yourself to really change for your family, or for your children. And I really, really miss you. I miss you like crazy, and there was nothing that I wouldn't do to hear your laugh again, or to feel your strong embrace, where it's where I got my hugs from. It's where I value hugs so much. So it's just a lot in there, right? In the grief, there's so much anger and frustration and sadness and grief, and yet at the same time, this despair and wanting to be in close relationship, to want to know how could I have, in some way, you're not supposed to, as a child of your parent, to alleviate their suffering, but still wanting this relationship to be able to alleviate his suffering.
Yeah. How does it feel in the moment to share that amongst your family, who are also sharing the things that they would say?
It felt amazing. It felt like a bonding moment, where this was for us to be able to share our suffering together and share the things that we never got to say to him, and just sort of realizing that even though as a family we experienced very similar situations, the way that we interpreted them, the way that they impacted our own lives was very, very different. Mm-hmm. We each had a very different relationship with my dad, and we see the ways that it plays out even now, today. And so, but to even be able to understand that we each had our own experience in all of the chaos, that it was something that bonded us, and yet it was also something that we each had our own worldview in.
Yeah, it was, and it's not the circle practice that you know now, but that ability to create space for fully, vulnerably sharing was really helpful for you, for your family to move forward in your healing. Because I think a lot of the times when we're going through tough situations, we tend to get head down. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to work on me. I'm going to focus on me. Without knowing what other people are thinking, and making assumptions a lot of the time, right? But to have that space to share and listen, right, was really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I will never forget those moments, and it's not the last time. I think we eventually became so bonded that we wanted more of those moments together. And the more of those moments that we created, the more unity that we shared within our family.
What does that look like over the years?
It has looked like, we could say last year, during Christmas time, we were able to all get together, and we brought the children brought their partners together, mm-hmm. and we all sat in circle together and talked about our own family lineages and what has brought us all together in this moment. Prior to that, it has looked like just sitting, the five of us, my stepdad included. And my stepdad is older, he's in his 60s now, white man, and not somebody that necessarily talks about his feelings or shares really at all. Very like hard shell, and he looks kind of like a mad dog, bulldog kind of guy, but he's so sweet and so tender, that, if I ask him, Pop, will you sit in circle with us just for a moment, to just share, or to just listen, and to have him, a couple years ago say, I've never participated in anything like this, and I don't feel like my words have ever been valuable. But, this isn't something I was taught in my family, and this isn't, how we relate to each other. But you all have really opened my eyes to a different way of being and engaging with family and what family actually means. And it's also looked like moments when we've had conflict with each other of saying, hey, I'm getting to this moment and I need to step away, or like been moments where my brother has had to be like, yo, it's not about you. I just need you to listen to me, right? It's been messy. It's been, but in that process of allowing ourselves to be in the messiness, we've also learned how to just sit, listen, and respect each other's words.
I think like that piece about like, it's not about you is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's this book called The Four Agreements, right? About, and one of the agreements is like to not take things personally, because it's rarely ever about you. But we're selfish people and we think the world revolves around us, right? And so when someone we love is causing us harm or saying something that like we don't appreciate, there's defensiveness, but a lot of the times that person just needs us to listen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how much of that is wrapped up in our socialization into white supremacy, right? If we're so taught how to be individualistic, we're always thinking about the world revolving around us and not around the collective. So that conditioning is strong, super strong. It's what we're kind of like told to go back to. Just think about yourself, we break up with somebody, it's like, take care of yourself, like you gotta keep pushing forward. So there's this balance that needs to be had between how do I really look out for myself and also look out for community.
It sounds like this has been ingrained in how you grew up. How has your Buddhist life shaped this way of being for you?
Man, I believe that it has everything to do with it. My Buddhist practice really talks about this process of human revolution. Mm-hmm. Human revolution, if we think about the term revolution, right? Thinking of like surmounting something, a big change of some shape or form. Mm-hmm. And to have that on an individual human level as a means to understand your interconnectedness with the rest of the world, not to just like, I think people have taken it and been like, yeah, individualism, just going to think about myself and my own human revolution. However, I think when you really, really, as I've the last couple of years gotten into the texts, the deep writings, and my mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, has written so many books as a means to help people along their journey to understand the importance of interconnectedness, the importance of how like you and everything that you experience within yourself is going to be reflected in your in your environment. And so it's like there's this other book that I've read called The Seed of the Soul that really, really intertwines with Buddhism, talks about when you're carrying something, you're carrying some sort of suffering, you're going to have that attract to your life as a means for it to be healed. And so when we are engaging in this healing process, to me, that is really deep human revolution, a change in perspective, a change in mindset, a reframe even, and really challenging my own suffering in a profound way. And that has looked a lot of different ways, from, the murder of my dad, being one of the biggest things to overcome, right? There's like this narrative that I carried that my life was just supposed to be shitty, that my life was supposed to be terrible, and that I was going to live in trauma forever. I was going to live in these cycles forever and forever. And I had to really challenge that to talk to myself in a way that is not just about survival, that is also treating myself really well, treating the people around me really well, understanding that as a human being, I have power and influence to impact people in my environment in a positive or negative way. And I think that's something that like restorative practices really tries to hit on when we're teaching it to young people, right? The impact of behaviors. And yeah, there's one particular moment where I had a partner. Long story short, it ended badly, mostly on my part, and he had to move to a different state. And I, kept in touch with him throughout the years, but there was one period of time where something kept telling me, reach out to this person. And I was already in a space of like beating myself up, and he ended up getting into a car accident because he was drunk driving, and he and the other driver died on impact. And after that, I was like, oh my God, if I hadn't done everything that I had done and blah, 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 like he wouldn't have become such an alcoholic, he would have been taking better care of himself. Maybe he would still be here, blah, 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 blah. Realizing that in those moments, number one, I had major impact, regardless of whether or not like I was at fault. I had to like really go through that too, right? Like he had options to change also. But still realizing that like what I do on a day-to-day basis and the choices that I make have a significant impact on the people around me, and emotionally, mentally, physically, all of those things manifest, right? And so my Buddhist practice has really trained me to be in a process of feeling what I feel, knowing what I feel, and I don't want to use this like language of like transforming it or just like toxic positivity, but really like being at peace with myself around the situation, overcoming this suffering and this hardship that I might be feeling.
Yeah, I like what I hear in that a lot is like the metaphor of the tree that we use to describe restorative justice, where, at the roots of it are our values and assumptions that like help us grow in that, but like the trunk of the tree that gets us to like those branches where we have restorative practice and fruits of healing, relationships, and accountability. In that trunk is like this internal work where we're identifying our emotions, working through our own trauma, so we can something that I'm struggling with is like, we're not just doing it so it can benefit others. Like we want to do it for ourselves. And it definitely has an impact on others. And it is not like that we are quote unquote at fault for the things that happen to other people. Like you were saying, people have choices, but we do have an impact on folks. And it's something that is really important for me when I think about like teaching people about restorative justice. It is not just that we are asking a specific set of questions to get to an outcome. It's like, how are you coming to that situation with that person? You've talked about, and within restorative justice, we're not trying to turn everybody into a Buddhist either, right?
Absolutely.
But it's trying to think about like the way that you show up, the way that you are in the world has an impact on other people, this idea of interconnection. I want to shift the conversation to thinking about like where you first learned the words restorative justice, because like these things that are restorative in nature have been a part of your life for so long. But a couple years ago, you learned the word restorative justice. What led up to that, and where have you gone since?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had just graduated college with a BA in sociology, and sociology, as one of my professors put it, is like the study of all the depressing things in the world. That's not the exact wording that he chose, but And so I came out of college, and it was also on a very strong campaign within my Buddhist practice, and was like, what am I supposed to do? I have these really strong values within my Buddhist practice, and I have this understanding of all of the depressing things that are happening and exist in the world. How do I meet those two wherever they are? And to be very honest, like, what I really did was just like sit and chant or pray about it for hours and hours. Like, I have to find this thing. And so I was also trying to find a place to live in Chicago. And there was one day where I was driving to visit my partner, and I was listening to this, not a podcast, but this like series of conferences. And there was this keynote speaker from Detroit who was talking about this work that he was doing in communities of color called Restorative Justice, and started talking about the philosophy and the set of practices. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is that thing. Now I'm just going to like write it down, restorative justice. This is where I want to be. This is the space. And so then I was apartment searching, and I came across this person named Charlie, who was going to have a 1-bedroom place open, and connected and asked, hey, can we meet up so that I can look at this place? And he said, yeah, sure. But first I'm going to be going to this sweat lodge in this community that I know. And I was like, what? Can I know more about this? Because my brothers have gone to sweat lodge before on the West Coast. But it was all men's sweat lodges. And so I was like, okay, well, but I'd always been curious and interested. And so I started talking to Charlie about this, and he was like, do you want to come? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Are you sure that's okay? And he was like, yeah, anybody like who is of Latinx descent can come. All right, well, so I show up to this this sweat lodge, and this is Tomas Ramirez's Semillas y Raíces, just this plot of land, and we sat in sweat lodge. It was my first time. I had a little burn around my nose. It was great, but I continued to come to this spot, Semillas y Raíces, and I went one day for a community garden kind of thing, not knowing that like this was going to intersect at all. And I met with Tomas just sort of impromptu. He was like, oh, who are you? Where are you coming from? And et cetera, getting to know me, and told him that I was moving to Chicago and I was going to be looking for a job. And he was like, oh, what kind of job will you be looking for? And I said, I'm looking for something in restorative justice. And his face lit up and was like, oh, really? Where I work right now, they're looking for restorative justice coaches. And I was like, oh, great. Like, would love more information. So that's when I really like started to come into restorative justice, right? I was participating in Semillas y Raíces, and then I interviewed at this place where we used to work together. And that's when I really came into the understanding of restorative justice practices.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. Wanted to throw in an explanatory comma for people who don't know what a sweat lodge is. Can you describe that for folks?
Yes, absolutely. So a sweat lodge is an indigenous ceremony. This one, Tomas, is from the Lakota tribe. And so it does it in the Inipi style, which is, it's a sacred, like kind of dome shaped, and it's covered completely. So it's kind of sauna-like. And it's a ceremony to cleanse your body, to cleanse, and to share, to be in community with other people. And Tomas is the one who leads them there, and people sing, people, share in circle, essentially, one at a time. It's the most like, it's a very intense and just cleansing experience to be in a sweat lodge and to be in community that is so powerful. It was the first time that I felt like I was home. I don't know if that really explains what a sweat lodge is. I don't really feel claimed to be able to give the best explanation, but
Sure, but just for people who like, what's that? That I feel like that works. So you started this job as a restorative practices coach. What all did that entail?
oh man, it entailed being assigned a school or two, actually. And you would go in, and the idea is that you work with CPS schools, Chicago Public Schools, particular schools that are either chosen mostly by CPS, but the organization had some say for a little while about which schools coaches were going to be attending, and give coaching, which was like super ambiguous about how it was going to actually go down, but coaching to teachers, administrators, and if you had a program where you could also interact with students, you also did that. So it required an understanding of like, what are all of these practices? What are the tools? And then this other piece of being able to coach other people. And it was challenging. It was extremely challenging to be in those systems and structures, and to not have complete, I hate the term buy-in, but that's, essentially what every school would use. How do we get buy-in from teachers? How do we get buy-in from administrators to want to do this work? And it felt a lot of times like trying to just catch whoever you could, unless the principal was very adamant about restorative practices and wanted particular teams, or was willing to give up some of their own principal-directed time, which was not always the case. So my job was to find as many champions as possible that would be willing to take on this extra work of learning restorative justice practices, which was a lot about communication or understanding frameworks. The first 3 months were the most challenging, because while my Buddhist practice set me up with the philosophical and the understanding of change and communicating, etc., there was these fundamental pieces of learning the social discipline window and learning the restorative communication observation tool, and then being able to teach other people about what these things are. So it was a trying
it's like,
time.
I was gonna say, it's like one thing to live out values, and another thing to teach someone how to do that in 12 weeks, right? Like, break it down into steps.
When every community is so different and unique, and you're going from, often it was Monday and Wednesday I'd be at one school, and Tuesday and Thursday I'd be at a different school. So you're moving from one community to the next, and then going back, shifting back and forth, and knowing how to address all of the needs that are happening in each particular community. When there's really, we define community as this school, right? But there's no interconnectedness. There's barely any relationships that are happening in schools. People are so siloed because they don't ever really have the time to engage with one another. They're always so consumed by the work that's right in front of them. And rightly so, right? Like, we want our teachers and our administrators to be doing the best as possible, but at what point are they also just so far away from each other that they can't just be humans together?
Yeah, for sure. It's a challenge that both you and I experienced doing that job. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you learned about yourself in that process?
Hoo-wee. I really learned how to really name my values. Name my values and live in them. I think I had these values that, crafted my worldview from the moments all before then. But this was my opportunity to actually look at myself and say, okay, what do I actually value when it comes to my relationships, when it comes to how I want to live my life, and how I engage with people on a day-to-day basis. And how do I know when I'm not within those values?
What are your values?
Thank you. I really, well, in living, in building relationships, or like wholly.
You said living your values, so I'm just reflecting the question back to you.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I really value love as I have love as a value, not as an emotion. I think that love encapsulates all of the emotions. I hope so. That you love somebody regardless of how angry you are or how happy and joyful you are. And I also really value integrity, that my actions also align with my words, and that my words align with my actions. Communication, and within that, like, there's a whole framework for communication, right? There's so many things that go into it, and I won't name all of those things, but communication being one of the very, very important values. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so with those two, how do you know when you are living them out? How do you know when you're not?
Yeah, there's this thing, I think all three of those values are very much within a framework of other things, or create a framework for other things. But I think about Brene Brown's acronym for trust called BRAVING, and all of those being within what I desire out of relationships, and they all intertwine, right? But it looks like having boundaries and being reliable. It looks like accountability, vaulting, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity, which are all very hard things to hold.
I guess like those are great, and those are abstract. I'm curious if there were like some concrete things that you would be willing to share.
Yeah. So within that, communication for me is like one of the biggest forms of love, of like showing love, of having love, of receiving love. So it looks like, I'll give a great, like, really concrete example. There was one morning I woke up last week and was just like having a really, really tough time. And I went into my partner's room and I was just kind of like, hey, I just want to let you know I'm feeling really grumpy and irritable, and I want you to know that it's not about you. I'm just in it today. I don't know what it is, and I love you. And they said, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, because I'm also feeling like really down and depressed and overwhelmed, and don't want you to feel like it's about you. I just really, also need some respite and maybe some space today. And I love you too.
Yeah. So like within and I'm just trying to tie it back to the tree, right? But like when we're talking about communication for connection, like one of the ways that we do that is checking in with each other, and not necessarily waiting for somebody to ask you, letting them know upfront, like, hey, this is what's going on, as specific or general as you want, but giving someone the ability to be like, all right, I know how to treat you going forward today because of whatever it is that you're going through. So thank you for giving that example. Is there an example of a time when you're not living out those values?
Oh, so many.
Sure.
I would say that there's probably more of those than the ones that are on point.
So I would say, what's an example, and then what's the lesson that you learned from that?
Gosh, I think that there's been plenty of relationships where there's been like somebody will say something to me, and I have a very I've had to tone this down over the years, but when I get angry, I can get really defensive, and I have a sharp tongue. And it was really bad when I was in high school, has gotten much, much better. But every once in a while, so I had a roommate last year, And there was something around cleaning that was happening, and I received a text while I was at work, and mistakenly checked it while I was at work, and it was like it felt very aggressive. It felt very pointed and blaming of like, what, like, am I supposed to be the only one? Like, there's this blah 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 all over the place, and like, don't you care at all? And I just like immediately was in my feelings and was like, you know what? I don't take somebody talking to me like that. Like, it sounds like you're really projecting onto me, and like, et cetera, et cetera. So like, just like full on analyzing, and bam, here you go, right back at you. And then the next day we both had to sit through a training that was all about like the 4Ds and like communicating, and just like, oh my God.
So can you describe the 4Ds?
Yeah, the 4Ds, denial of personal responsibility, demand thinking, diagnosis, and
Deserve
thinking.
Yeah.
These are the 4 things that really break down communication. I would also add the 5th one being defensiveness.
Sure.
But yeah, when we are in denial of personal responsibility, we're saying that there's like this rule or law or this thing that's in place, and we'll give an example of, say, a student is out of their uniform and they show up to school anyway, and the teacher or somebody says, you need to go change. It's school rules. You have to go do this. And a student says, well, this teacher doesn't care and doesn't let me, or doesn't care that I'm out of uniform. How come you care so much? And it's like, well, it's school rules and I follow the school rules. Rather than being like, hey, I see that you're out of school uniform, and it's really important to me that we be in agreement about, following through on the guidelines that have been set by the school. And I am here to enforce that. Really like taking ownership, right? Instead of like blaming it on school rule or blaming it on something outside of yourself. Go ahead.
I'll say, isn't it also like denial of students' personal responsibility, saying like, well, the other teacher lets me do it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So it happens when we see it, then we model it too. And let's see, deserve thinking is like, if somebody did something great, they deserve something great. If somebody did something bad, they deserve something bad. Taking this almost like law of karma, but not knowing much about what karma really is. And then
that's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole nother podcast. And then demands is like, pretty self-explanatory. Get over here, sit down, do what you're told to do, etc. And then, which one have I not gone over? Diagnosis, when we're saying, you know what your problem is, or even just labeling somebody, right? Labeling somebody as a frequent flyer, labeling somebody as a stereotype, anything that is...
or just like lazy even, right?
Yeah, lazy is also one, right? All of these labels that we give to other people without being in conversation with them about it.
Right, and so like we want to move into a place where we're asking questions, approaching with curiosity, right? And then making requests out of a need, right? But like owning that like it is something that like we need or want, and requesting, not demanding that from someone, and really making requests, like really giving people agency instead of just saying like, no, you have to do this because I need this. It's like, we're in relationship together, we're connected, and this is how it would make me feel if you did this, right? And it's not to circle back to one of the things that you're saying earlier. It's not that it is wholly, a student's responsibility to take care of the needs of their teacher, but they do have an impact, right?
Absolutely. That's what interconnection is, right? We, whatever choices we make in some shape or form is going to impact another person. Every decision that we make. has an impact, whether it's small or very large.
Yeah.
Which is also not to say that like get stuck in that, right? Of don't make decisions because we're worried about the impact that it's going to have. It's a very fine balance.
Mm-hmm. You're not working at that organization anymore. What are you up to now?
Now, I am working with Amplify RJ.
Oh, that's
You didn't know, David.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am working with Amplify RJ. Have been doing, at first was doing some facilitation of our Intro to RJ workshops, and then slowly transitioned.
I was going to say, which are now asynchronous, a self-paced online course, which you can take if you go to tiny.cc/ARJ capitalized and then online lowercase. Of course, link in the description. Continue.
Yeah. So then my role slowly transitioned into creating curriculum for a whole new set of workshops that we were going to be releasing that really focus on the development of the first relationship that you have is with yourself. Mm-hmm. And then how does that relationship with yourself impact the way that you show up in relationships, and how to like navigate those kinds of conversations. Also doing an ARJ BIPOC book club. Right now we're going to start reading Colorizing Restorative Justice. Mm-hmm. And I'm really, really excited for that, to just be in community with other BIPOC from all over the country who are curious and also desiring to bring their whole authentic selves to this work.
Yeah. I've definitely appreciated having you as a part of the team over the last few months as Amplify RJ has, been born and then has been growing. What's something that you've learned along the way?
Something that I've learned along the way of building out Amplify RJ?
Yeah, as far as like maybe in like the facilitation or the building of the curriculum or things like that.
I think before there was a tension for me around how to engage people with this work, because my experience in schools was there was so much pushback, there was so much resistance to engaging, partially because of time constraints, right? But still, you cannot force somebody to do the internal work, and so I think there was some doubt that I experienced around, people don't want to do this work. And what I really learned is people do want to do this work, but maybe don't always have the questions to ask themselves, or are hungry to build the skills. When I think at a point, especially 2020, right? It's been such a wild year in terms of race dynamics and the election being yesterday and all of these things, COVID being a reality and people reevaluating what it means to produce and to work and etc. I have learned that people really do want to find different ways to relate to one another. People really do want and care about being anti-racist, and are curious on how to do more of that.
Yeah.
And I think it has brought hope, for sure.
I think one of the challenges for us as we're building this is most people in the world don't know the words restorative justice. And so how do we frame it in a way that helps them relate to it? I think the words anti-racism are becoming more popular, but I mean, we're also trying to get to these ideas of like abolition of police and prisons, right? But not just like those institutions, but like abolition of like punitive thinking, right? And the need to police ourselves and our communities. that's like next level thinking that I think people do want, to your point, but don't even have language for or haven't been given the space to imagine. I think one of the ways that we're going to be approaching that is like through this lens of like restorative justice helps us go beyond quote unquote diversity and inclusion, right? Because I think one of the authors that you shared with me, this guy Resmaa Menakem, he talks about like when we're speaking of diversity, like what is it diverse from? Whiteness, right? And not just like white bodies, but like all of the things that come with whiteness. And then when we're talking about inclusion, we're often talking about including people into systems that are steeped in whiteness. So like we really want to be reimagining something different. And that's what we're trying to do here, and finding the words to attract people to wanting to learn just a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like such a huge challenge, right? But one piece at a time to get as many people involved as possible. And I really want to somehow get away from this understanding that restorative justice is like like you have been talking about with people, right? That they knew about were practicing restorative justice long before they knew what the words even were. And so, yeah, it's not just about being restorative or having restorative justice under your belt, but like, how do you live your life and how do you want to relate to people in a way that's going to honor and respect the dignity of their life. Really been thinking a lot about dignity recently. What does it mean to have dignity, to give dignity? What does it look like to allow somebody to take your dignity, right? To take that power away from you. We do it a lot through shaming. And when we tell somebody that they've done something wrong and that, it can often be misconstrued as this, well, then who I am is wrong. And it needing to be very clear that it's not about that, because if not, shame sets in this way that makes you really question your own dignity without even realizing it.
What does restorative justice mean to you?
Restorative justice for me is a way of being with myself and a way of being with other people. And it's not just about this framework of being, it's really acknowledging and honoring who you are and who other people are. Understanding that those things don't have to conflict, that it's okay to agree to disagree. There is no such thing as like perfection, right? We're all complex. And it's understanding the paradoxes and complexities that exist within human life, and the whole environment.
What is one place or situation you wish people really knew this work?
The White House.
Say more.
It's the day, I wish that there was more investigation into why white supremacists think and feel the way that they do, or what are these ideologies, what were they taught, what are the experiences, what would it take for them to actually care about the conglomerate of people, and not just their own.
Yeah. You get to sit in circle with You get to sit in circle with 4 other people. Who are they and what do you talk about?
One person that comes to mind is Gloria Anzaldúa, who is a Chicanx feminist author who passed away in 2004. I would say I'd really be curious to sit with James Baldwin. And I'd also love to sit with Daisaku Ikeda. That's 3. And I'd also really love to sit and talk with Angela Davis.
What do the 5 of you talk about?
That's a super interesting dialogue. This, like, all of these intersections of building bridges and liberation of people and happiness, what it takes for happiness, real, true, absolute happiness, and how to, how to eradicate racism from our own hearts.
What's one thing you want everybody listening right now to know?
I want everyone to know, especially today, that you are loved by this person who may or may not know you, but is sending out love all the time.
And how can people support you, your work, in the ways that you want to be supported?
This is going to be real touchy-feely, per usual, count on me. Just, if you follow me, if you know me, if you have my email, send me a little thank you message or something, and come and join us for some of our workshops.
All right. We'll be back next week. Until then, be well. Take care. Thank you so much, Omi.
Thanks, David. See you later.
Like what you heard? Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast on whatever platform you're using right now. It really helps us further amplify this work. You can also support us by following us on our social platforms, signing up for our email list, rocking our new merch, joining our Patreon, or signing up for a workshop. So many options! Links to everything in the show notes and on our website, amplifyrj.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.